the Trump administration is increasing threats to deploy federal forces to Chicago. The president said he wants a crackdown on crime there, while the Democratic governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, is calling it something else, a potential invasion. So far this Labor Day weekend, dozens of shootings have been reported in Chicago. The president is warning that Pritzker, he better, quote, straighten it out fast or we're coming. The governor says the White House is making plans in secret without communicating with his office. And it does come as CNN is reporting that the Trump administration is planning a major immigration operation in Chicago as early as this week. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem has confirmed that ICE will expand operations in that city and other locations. But Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson has now signed an executive order instructing local police not to assist in any federal immigration crackdown. Let's get right to Chicago this morning for the latest. CNN's Whitney Wild is there. Whitney, give us the status.
John, the expectation here is that there are going to be federal resources surged into the city of Chicago by Friday. The expectation is that's going to look like at least armored vehicles, very likely boots on the ground here. And when you're looking at some framework across the country to find out how this is going to look in Chicago, the question is it going to look like Washington, D.C., or is it going to look like Los Angeles? And our sources are telling us that this is going to look a lot more like Los Angeles. And that means that this is going to be an immigration push. So the plan here, as we understand it, is that this is going to surge immigration agents to Chicago. The potential for the National Guard deployment would be for a peacekeeping effort. The White House in Los Angeles had previously said that the role of the National Guard was really to ensure that these agents can carry out their immigration duties effectively and safely. The city is doing whatever they can to try to stop this ahead of time, John. And law enforcement here will admit that there's just, in city leaders here will admit there's just not a lot that they can do. The Illinois Attorney General has made clear he cannot file a lawsuit preemptively. Meanwhile, Brandon Johnson, as you had mentioned, signed an executive order reaffirming the city's steps in reaction to this. So it directs city officials not to engage with federal officials as they carry out these actions. Specifically, the Chicago Police Department is not to partake in any of these actions. City offices need to look for legal and legislative efforts to try to stop this. Meanwhile, Governor J.B. Pritzker, who has publicly sparred with President Trump, who has drawn the president's ire by name, is firing back. Here are some very terse words from J.B. Pritzker on this potential immigration deployment.
No one in the administration, the president or anybody under him, has called anyone in my administration and me have not called the city of Chicago or anyone else. So it's clear that in secret they're planning this. Well, it's an invasion with U.S. troops if they, in fact, do that.
The crime situation here, as we just had some crime stats up, I want to walk you through that a little bit more, because what the leaders here say is that Chicago represents a success story. They've been able to effectively bring down major crime categories in double digits. However, as you saw President Trump point out, they had a really violent weekend in Chicago over Labor Day weekend. 24 people shot, several people killed. So there is, you can make data say a lot of things, John. And for the Trump administration, it is representative of a major problem here. However, leaders here look at the crime drop as a success story.
Yeah, the data in the middle of the political debate right now. Whitney Wild for us in Chicago. Thank you very much. Yana?
All right, joining me now, CNN senior political analyst Ron Brownstein. He's written a CNN analysis about the messaging from Democrats against the president, including his threats to send National Guard troops to more U.S. cities. It's titled, "This One Word Captures the Most Important Division Among Democrats." And not to spoil too much, but that word is distraction. So tell us more what you mean about that one important word, Ron.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the one word is distraction. When the Democratic congressional leaders like Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries criticize Trump's actions in terms of threatening democracy or deploying troops to U.S. cities, they almost invariably, Bianna, describe it as a distraction from something else, whether it's Epstein, Medicaid cuts, inflation. That infuriates a whole other camp of Democrats who believe that the deployment of troops to U.S. cities, the other steps Trump has taken to kind of corrode the foundations of democratic safeguards in the U.S. aren't a distraction. They are the central front of his second term. and J.B. Pritzker, Gavin Newsom, I think, would be the leaders in that camp. And it really is a divide. Do you want to run against Trump fundamentally on the price of eggs? Or do you want to focus the public on the things that he is doing that very much depart from our tradition? You know, the idea of armored troops in multiple American cities, whatever the justification, whether it's justified on the grounds of immigration enforcement or crime, that is fundamentally alien from the American tradition. I mean, we have not seen troops in U.S. cities except at the moments of greatest civil disorder. We have a Posse Comitatus Act from the 19th century, which theoretically on paper bars the use of troops for domestic law enforcement. This is really an image that is more in common with authoritarian countries of troops in the streets of the biggest cities. And so this is a very significant departure from the way the military has existed throughout our history. You have one group of Democrats who believe that is a fundamental issue facing us, another one that wants to talk primarily about Medicaid and tax cuts.
And at this point, it's not hypotheticals or threats. We've seen this actually happen in cities like Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., and now it appears to be heading for Chicago as well. Secretary Noem saying that ICE resources are going to be deployed to that city with broader expansions, quote, on the table. So politically, what is the playbook here for the administration, Ron? And Chicago being the case study, as Whitney reported, they're planning for this to look a lot like what we saw in the streets of Los Angeles where you are right now.
Yeah, first of all, I mean, it's important to understand that the administration has been claiming in court the authority to do this everywhere and anywhere. That original executive order that authorized the deployment of the National Guard to LA did not specify LA or California. It said that the president would be justified to take control of the National Guard anywhere where there are protests against immigration enforcement or where protests could reasonably be expected to develop. And simultaneously in court in California, they are arguing that the Posse Comitatus Act, which is the 19th century law barring the use of the military for domestic law enforcement, essentially is toothless. Courts cannot order any remedy. The only remedy is a criminal prosecution. A court cannot require the administration not to deploy troops. So they are basically saying they can do this wherever they want. We'll see whether the courts agree. Now, I think the fundamental issue here is, what is this about? Is this fundamentally about fighting crime, or is it about numbing Americans to an image that, as I said, is alien to our history and much more common in authoritarian countries, of troops in the streets of our big cities? Voters trust Trump more than Democrats on crime. Whether they are willing to see troops patrolling the streets of multiple American cities, setting up checkpoints that people have to go through, as they have had at points in D.C., I think that is a very different political question.
Well, quickly, Governor Pritzker says this is part of Trump's plan to stop the election, the midterms in 2026, or, quote, to frankly take control of those elections. Do you think he's right?
I think they are, as I said, numbing Americans to the image of troops in the streets of cities, something that is completely alien to our history, except at the moments of greatest, threat, like major civil disorder. The last time, to do this, Bianna, he will have to federalize the National Guard over the objection of the governor of Illinois, just as he did in California. We haven't seen that since the heyday of the civil rights era, when Southern segregationists were actively impeding the enforcement of federal law. And I think once you make that a routine reflex, anything is on the table and possible.
That's right, because historically it's always been the governors that have requested the National Guard if need be. Not the case now, that's for sure. Ron Brownstein, thank you so much.